use case today takes us to Mexico City. The scenario is that we have a handful of executives traveling here for some upcoming meetings, and we want to do some advanced assessment work across their itinerary to make sure that we can make the right recommendations to keep them safe and ensure a productive experience. For this assessment, I'm going to start us at the city level just to get a lay of the land and understand what's normal throughout Mexico City. Here we can see the most common event types throughout the city are things like fraud, harassment, I'll take note of that one, nonviolent theft, theft from vehicle, robbery, another one I might take note of for EP. And as we go down the list, you can kind of see how often these things are occurring throughout the city. We're going to see that violent crime is most common in the evening time frame, but relatively consistent throughout other time periods. With property crime, we're going to see that evening time frame and morning are the two most common time periods. So we'll keep that in mind too as we get a little bit deeper. Overall, we can see crime has been pretty flat for the past 12 months in Mexico City, and when we look back 5 years and take into account things like seasonality, we don't see too much ebbs and flows at overall city crime volume. Now let's dig in a little deeper. As we can see from our boundary maps, we have a few locations that are what sit in relatively high-risk areas for neighborhoods in Mexico City. What we want to do now is dial in the assessment to make sure that we're only focused on the event types that we care about. We saw in the threat breakdown we have quite a few, but for things like executive protection, we might really only care about like violent crime, maybe vehicle theft, right? If people are, traveling with a vehicle. And as we can see, this changes things a little bit. Now, half of our locations are in low or medium to low risk areas. The other half of our locations sit in what are high risk areas for these event types that we've captured. So let's figure out why. As we click into these neighborhoods, we're going to see that over the past 12 months, there's been about 76 robberies, 42 instances of harassment, 32 vehicle thefts, and 28 simple assaults. We get the counts for each one of these incidents. This tells us how often these things are occurring. Time of day is going to show us that, in contrast to what we see at the city level, the most common time to experience these types of events is going to be in the nighttime. We still see a high rate of these in the evening, but more consistency throughout morning, midday, evening, with a jump in the nighttime frame. So this is something we might include in our recommendations that, there's about a 10 to 15% increase in the likelihood of witnessing or experiencing a violent crime going from about that 8 p.m. mark to later in the evening. Now, let's check out another location as we dig in deeper. We see another higher risk area down south. We can see that we have a fairly similar breakdown of the types of crimes happening, except we see our third most common crime type here jump to sex offenses, right? Simple assault, we see a little bit of a reduction of that. And here we see evening as sort of that time period where we see about twice as many incidents as the next closest time period. So this is one, if we're going to a meeting later in the day, we probably want to make sure that we're taking private transportation here. And, especially if I click on this heat map, we'll see a lot of the activity here is concentrated right around this meeting location. And if I switch over to radius and I draw this down to let's just say 0.2 miles around the site that we're evaluating, the majority of that crime that we're talking about is really happening right in those few blocks right around this location. So private transportation, making sure that you're practicing good situational awareness best practices. When we look at trend analysis, we can see that things have been pretty flat in this area over the past 12 months. And again, similar to the city, seasonality doesn't play much of a factor, okay? Now, we also might be interested in understanding how this area is impacted by unrest. So I'm gonna turn off my crime types, and I'm gonna look at things that might disrupt our travel in other ways, things like violent unrest, nonviolent protest, that kind of thing. As I switch over to my event view, what I can see is that there's been a few instances of unrest in the area that we're gonna be operating in the past 12 months. A lot of it is concentrated up north here. So why don't I expand my radius to 5 miles, just so I can see in the area that I'm gonna be spending my time in, what types of unrest activity are most commonly happening. Threat breakdown is gonna quickly tell me that it's mostly peaceful protests, but there's actually been quite a few attacks on civilians in the past 12 months. Maybe I wanna dig into those a little bit more. Digging into those attacks on civilians, I'm going to be able to get a little bit more detail here. If I go over to my events list and I break down, let's just look at the most recent attack. We can see actor groups involved in the event, some details associated with the event, as well as whether or not there were any fatalities. We'll also get some attribution data here. So this helps us understand, how often these types of things are occurring in the areas that we're operating in, what type of actor groups and what type of activity is driving these types of events, so that we can make sure that we're planning accordingly if we do catch wind that things like this might be popping up during our visit. These are all ways that our customers are using not just data, but the context that come with the detailed map views to help really communicate and justify the recommendations that they're putting forward for these executive protection type trips. Hope this is helpful. Let us know what else you'd like to see.